Okay, so Samach Zion Omid Beis, we're in the bottom third of the page, and the last thing we said last week, we learned that um, if a person makes a mashkin, right? He has a pledged property, and where the borrower can come to the lender before the end of the period of the loan and pay it off, because that's not always the case. And so does he can remove him. So the Gemara says that if he says that he can remove him, then at the very moment he says it, then the the lender who's been collecting, let's say, the dates that fall off the trees into baskets, he immediately loses ownership of those baskets. In other words, it's the baskets, according to this view, are not considered a kinyan, right? It's not considered a kinyan, and therefore, literally it stops in midstream. He can no longer take it, except if he makes a kinyan. So, in other words, what we're saying is that only a kinyan hakbal, if let's say he took the dates of the baskets and he made a kinyan hakbal before the borrower came back and said, I'm paying you. So at the time that he was paying him, the ownership had already vested because of the kinyan. So if the kinyan was made before, now if he makes the kinyan after the borrower tells him, I'm going to pay you off, then it doesn't help because then it's too late because he doesn't own it, right? Then the Gemara finishes up by saying, well, what happens if the borrower or the buyers kalim were in the rishus? In other words, if the mats, it's one thing to have the mats in the other guy's field, but what happens if the borrower's kalim were in the rishus of the mocher? So can he immediately terminate because it's his kli, it's his own kli. So can he terminate instantly when he says I want to pay? So the Gemara says no, that even without a kinyan hakbah, then he is kind of, because it's his kli. So we have something called kinyan kli and kinyan hakbah. Kinyan hakbah is when he made a specific hakbah, which is a recognized kinyan. And once he makes that hakbah, no matter what the lover or the lokeach, either way, says to him, he owns it. But if he has a kli, his own kli, in the other guy's field, and it's accumulating, let's say, the dates, that's called kinyan kli, and the kli overrides the repayment. It overrides the repayment, and therefore he's the owner. So that's how we discussed it at the time, and so we see that there are different ways that a person can be kinda, and the subtlety of it is that the timing is very important, whether it's kinyan kli or kinyan hakbah. So we say kinyan hakbah has to be made before the eviction notice, before he says, I'm paying you, so you have to leave. A kinyan kli overrides that, and even if he's paying him back, what's in the kli is already a kinyan automatically, even if he never lifted it. He never did a hakbah. He just had the kli. So, but the kli itself is what controls and makes it his. That's how the Gemara sort of ended it last week. Now,
Excuse me, Rabbi,
yeah,
before we go ahead, there's something that maybe I missed it a long time ago or whatever, but this setup, what we've talked about is that somebody lends money and it's due on a certain date.
right.
Now, what happens if they set up time payments so much every month the lender has to pay back. I mean, that's another major
Yeah, the borrower, the
part of
borrower,
the has
the
to pay
borrower.
back. Right, yeah, the bar. But that's a common thing that's done today. Time payments, you pay out everything. Now, all of this seems to me would change drastically if the setup was you pay every month to pay off the loan.
Right, but right, but that wouldn't necessarily change our halacha here because as long as there is a debt in place, then the lender has certain rights. The reason why we said that he prepaid the entire thing is because now the lender has no longer a vested right in the property because he has no ownership claim. He has no claim. In a time payment, okay, it's very good. He pays him 10% and over, 20%, whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that he takes away the ownership interest. He's paying him, but the payment doesn't change the circumstance. The only thing that changes the circumstance is if the lender no longer has a shaykhis, he no longer has a connection to the land. As long as he has a connection, even if it's 90% or 80% or 70%, whatever the payments dictate, then he still has violence. He still has some ownership interest, and he can still take it. It's so the Gemara's point is that if the prepayment is going to be made in total, not in installments like you point out, in installments it doesn't change the halacha.
Yeah.
Only a total prepayment where the lender no longer has an interest. As long as he has some interest in it, then the higher he can collect the fruit or
Yeah.
whatever comes down.
So I think also this idea, we think normally of installment payments. We think whether it's a mortgage, a car loan, or whatever, we think in terms of paying off, 10% each month, whatever it is. But a lot of that, while they certainly had such things, I'm sure a long time ago, you have somebody needs to borrow money and he's investing in a business and he's going to pay it off piece by piece as the business grows and so on, or whatever, fine. But the to me, the basic rationale for why we have installment payments now, to a certain extent, is because of interest. Because by paying off piece by piece, you now don't have to keep accumulating interest on the principal that you paid off, the compound interest, which makes a huge difference over the life of a mortgage and things like that. And so but back then, I mean, the whole idea here is we're trying to figure out how do you make sure that you're not paying ribis. And
Right.
so once you're not paying ribis, conceptually, there's no difference between, 10 installments or a lump sum at the date the
But,
dues
but
it's due.
let's say there's no interest
Right.
in the installment technique.
Right.
You still, the ownership, the percent owned by the borrower and the percent owned by the lender is constantly changing.
Right. No,
So
I agree
why
in
doesn't it
principle.
have side
Yeah.
effects of
Yeah.
I don't own, I mean, when you lease a car, you don't really own it.
Right.
The one that lent the money owns more
Right.
of it, and that's
Correct.
so,
And that's the
it
point here.
shifts. It
That's
shifts
our point
during the
here.
time of the payback. So how does he have the right to take the payrolls and all of that stuff that we talked about when in fact his ownership of the land to allow him to take was based on a loan, but the loan is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So why doesn't it affect what percent of the payrolls he can take every month? The percent that he should be allowed to take should drop as he's paying off the loan.
Yeah, but from the Gemara's standpoint, it's an all or nothing proposition. I understand what you're saying, but even today, let's say you pay an installment, then a car loan is a good example. Who still owns the car? You don't own the car until you pay off the final payment and you get your deed or whatever it is. It's still owned by the seller, by the company that's selling it to you.
Except that in a car loan, the end result is you return the car. So you're not really buying a percent of the car. At the end of the loan, they'll tell you how much you can buy the car for. but all along you don't have a percent of the car ever until you either return it at the end of the loan or you buy it.
And that's the same thing here. So the Gemara is basically saying that the borrower can prepay, but if he's prepaying in dribs and drabs, if he's paying in percentages over a period of time, that doesn't change the relationship between the two parties. The lender is still in control. Therefore, he can. You're asking maybe he should only take half the fruit because he owns half the money. It doesn't work that way. In other words, it's an all or nothing proposition. Either he owns it or he doesn't own it. So the only thing the Gemara is telling us is that where the custom is that he has a right to prepay, it means prepay in full, not prepay.
I understand that. I understand.
Yeah.
But what happens if you have the same loan situation, but there's some damage happens, the thing gets destroyed part way through? Then what's which was the lender own who collects the insurance? That whole thing, something can happen during that loan period and could change the situation if the item gets destroyed.
Yeah.
Hurricane or whatever it is.
Right. So the Gemara in a little bit is going to address that kind of issue as depending on the nature of the relationship between the seller or the lender and the borrower, that will determine who, like you just say, bears the burden of a loss or so the Gemara is going to address that in a sort of a manner. So let's hold off. We can revisit that question, but that's very much a good question. Is who's achrayim? Who's responsible? I mean, the fact that the ownership doesn't change. The borrower is still the owner, ultimately the owner. Now, with karka, you can't really say it's destroyed. I mean, you don't have that kind of situation because karka doesn't destroy, more or less. But again, with other things, metalton and other things, that question is raised, and we'll see how the Gemara handles that in terms of who's responsible under different circumstances. So we'll point that out then at the time. Okay, so that was how we finished last week. Now the Gemara goes on and says, Pshita, it's very simple, it's very straightforward. And because the Gemara wants to say it's straightforward. But Asra Misalka, in a place where you can prepay. Now, v'oma lo mistakalna. The lender is making a condition which is different than the minig hamakom. The minig of hamakom is that the borrower can prepay. That's what the custom is. The lender says, nope, I'm only making this loan if I can maintain the loan for the period and it can't be prepaid. So he's imposing a condition different than the custom of the place. So we need to understand which overrides. Is it the custom that has the strength, or is it his condition? So the Gemara says, since he said that I will not be removed from the property, that controls. So in other words, the parties can make an agreement which, notwithstanding what the general custom is. The custom is you can prepay. Absent anything else, that is what this loan looks like. I can prepay and I can evict you. But if the lender says, I don't want to make that kind of a loan, I want a loan where I'm going to be in control, because, for instance, being in control for a period of time means that he can do certain things that without worry that he'll be upended by the borrower, because now he knows his plan for the next, let's say, 5 years. So he can impose that. So the Gemara says, yes, he can do that. But now, what about the other way? What happens in a place where there is not a right of prepayment? And the lender says, if you want to prepay, I will allow you to prepay. So now we have the flip side. The lender is being conceding his right. His right is to not get prepaid, because that's the minhag. But he says, you know what? If you want to prepay, I will allow you to prepay. So what do you think? Do you think that the other side should I mean, what should be the halacha? Strike the Gemara, my. Is it the same on both sides of the coin? Says the Gemara, Sorach lemikne minei olo. So here we have a delicate issue. What's the issue? When people make a loan, if I make conditions before I hand over the money is the consideration of the loan. If I make a condition, I do not want to be prepaid, even with the minhag is to repay, and he does it before he gives the loan, 100% okay, he can make, because why? Because the consideration for his statement is the loan. Now, what happens if they make a deal and the deal is that he will not be evicted? Then 6 months into the deal, he comes to the lender, comes to the borrower and says, you know what? I thought it over. I will give you the right to prepay. Even though the custom is not, I'll give you the right to prepay. So there has to be consideration for that. For changing the terms of the loan, there has to be consideration. What's the consideration? When you make the statement before you make the loan, and then you turn over the money for the loan, the money is the consideration. And that's 100% okay. That's the kinyan, the consideration. But if you change the terms after you've made the loan, what if you're giving him a return as value? So that's the Gemara's kasha here. If a person is in a place where you can't evict, and he gave him the money under those terms, and then he comes back and says, it's okay, I will allow you to evict me. So the Gemara asks the kasha, mine. Does he have to make a kinyan? It's not automatic. Does he have to make a kinyan? Although, so in other words, now we're asking the kasha, if you change the terms the other way, is that okay? And the Gemara says, there's a machlokes. There's a machlokes on this as to whether or not you could just do it sort of spontaneously, or does he have to do some kind of Kabbalah's kinyan, which could be just simply giving him a suitor, like we do on Mechiras Chametz, right? Mechiras Chametz, we give a kinyan suitor, but because that's the consideration. But if you don't have consideration, then he could say all day long, I'm changing the terms don't change. Now, I'm not sure in our circumstances today, if a person makes that kind of statement, so the question is whether an oral statement is acceptable or not, but the inyan of consideration is not on the table. In Gemara times, the only way you can make a transaction is with the kinyan. Now we know kinyan mesira, kinyan hagboah. There's all kinds of kinyanim. But if it's in real time, then the money itself is the kinyan, is the consideration. But if it's not in real time, correct the Gemara, what do we do? Is it consideration? Do we say you don't need, or do we need consideration? So that's the Gemara's kasha for us to contemplate what would be the halacha under those circumstances. So now the Gemara says, okay, so here's how there's a machlokes of Papa and Rav Sheshes and Rav Papa says lo tzarach lemikne minei, that you don't have to do. In other words, the kinyan that was made at the outset suffices. Even if there's a change later, you don't have to do another kinyan. According to Papa, one kinyan is sufficient. There was a kinyan in the beginning. Why? He gave him the money. And they made a deal. But the deal was that you can't prepay. So now when you admit that you want to prepay, says Rav Papa, okay, it's just changing the wording, but not changing the principle of it. Therefore, you don't need to have a separate kinyan in order to make that kind of deal happen, because it happens regardless. In other words, so now what are we dealing with? So we learned a couple of weeks ago the concept of mechila, right? Mechila means that even though we have a deal, Michael, I can be Michael, I can forego what I agreed upon. It's upon me to do that. So Rav Papa is saying that the Indian of Mechila gives me the right to say that you do not have to make another kinyan, because he can be Michael. I mean, if Mechila, by the way, is an oral thing. It's not, you don't have to have a star. He comes in and says, I'm Michael. I don't need to get, I can be prepaid. So that's Rav Papa's sheet, because he holds that Mechila plays a role. Of Sheshes great Ravini Omer, Sorach lemikne minei. No, not so simple. You have to so he has a different approach. He says that yes, there is a concept of mechila, but mechila works when two people engage, and let's say, oh, you can be Michael because it's something that is, in other words, it's between the two parties. But we're one party. This mechila, this situation here, doesn't involve the borrower. It's just the lender. The lender is taking upon himself a new circumstance. So according to Rav Sheshes B'Reid Adi, mechila doesn't help. It's not that there isn't mechila. I agree with Rav Papa, there is mechila, but mechila only helps when the mechila is between me and you. But when the mechila is on myself, because I'm changing my terms, I have the property. And I say, I'm going to let you take it early. So he's in control of the property, and he says, I'll be Michael. According to Rav Sheshes Ravidi, their mechila doesn't help. So Rav Papa says mechila helps all the time, and Rav Sheshes Ravidi says it only helps when the two parties, I owe you something, and so between us, I can be the terms, but not when I am being mindful on myself. So it's a little, you have to understand the concept. So in other words, mechila helps in some circumstances, whereas Rav Papa says mechila always helps. Therefore, there's not a problem. And Rav Sheshes says, tzarach lemikne minei, and therefore all's not lost, but you have to make a kinyan. So the question here is, if you change the circumstance after the fact, after you've made the loan, where's the consideration? According to Rav Papa, you don't need consideration because mechila always helps. According to Rav Sheshes Ravidi, no, mechila doesn't always help. It helps in some circumstance, but in others it doesn't. So when it doesn't help, you need a kinyan. It's not that you can't do it, it's just the mechila alone isn't enough. Because you can't be mindful on yourself. Yeah, okay.
Isn't the lender isn't the owner making it easier for the lender in case he comes into some Yerusha money, he can pay back the loan and get out of this whole deal?
Why do you say easy?
The lender's doing a chesed to the borrower by allowing him to prepay, even though it wasn't written in the original contract.
Right.
So what's the problem? Let him do the chesed towards the lender. Why do we have to complicate by saying I'm giving you another option you You didn't have to pay for it. It's free. I'm just giving you the option to pay back earlier whenever. Why does that become the subject of all of these questions when it's just a chesed to the lender?
Well,
Okay.
I agree with Jay's position, but I don't agree with the reason. The lender might want his cash back earlier. So by giving him a prepayment option, he gets it back. So there is a reason why he may want to. It's not necessarily a chesed to the lender because the
Right.
lender could hold on to the money and pay it back when it's time. I mean, the borrower, but the lender is then getting his cash back earlier. So he's getting a benefit that he wouldn't otherwise get.
So, right, he's getting a benefit. So therefore,
It's a
that's the
theoretical
point here.
benefit
The Papa
because
says,
it
because
may
he's
not, it
getting
may
a
not
benefit,
pay him back.
that he can be mindful. Right, he can be mindful because he's getting a benefit. But in this particular circumstance, let's just say everybody acknowledges that a benefit can be had with the prepayment. The question is, the terms of the deal have already been set. So in order to change the terms of the deal, do you need to make a kinyan? That's the issue. We're not arguing the fact that the lender will get a benefit by getting the cash back. No
But
question
but
about it.
but you say that the deal's already been set. The deal is I lent him money
And no prepayment.
and no prepayment. So I say to him, look, I'm going to let you prepay. I don't understand how that changes the deal, except for the fact that he's saying, I'm not forcing you to prepay, but if you want to prepay, it's fine. But you're not getting any consideration for the original deal. You're lending. I mean, in the example you gave, he gets to live in the apartment, which is a benefit that,
Right.
again, I argue he shouldn't be getting because it's merely a loan. So, but if you look at it that way, and he can prepay, it could be a benefit to the lender. It may not be, but it doesn't change the term. It says you may, not that you have to.
So uh, I think the Gemara is establishing a principle. Okay, notwithstanding what you said, Michael or Jay, the Gemara wants to establish a principle. Can two people engage in a deal? And we know that there has to be consideration in every deal. That's absolutely, a ground rule. There has to be consideration. So now the Gemara is grappling with the fact that can you do consideration after the fact, and does that consideration valid?
But Rabbi, if there was a straight loan deal,
Yeah,
and there's no occupancy, there's no fruit, no nothing, there's not consideration in that deal. I'm
no,
paying you
yes, no,
back.
no,
I'm
no,
lending
Michael.
you and you're paying me back. I'm doing something as a favor to you. It is an agreement that I have to pay you back, but I'm not getting anything in return
No,
for
no, no.
that.
So Michael, in a straight loan, the fact that the lender is giving the money to the borrower, that's the consideration. That is considered consideration.
But what is the lender getting as consideration? What is he getting in
use of the
return?
property. Use of the property. He has the
But
property.
but that's only if there's a security interest. In a straight loan with no security interest,
Right.
he's not getting anything in return.
But you don't need to, because now there's no Kenyan involved. The only reason why there's Kenyan is because it is a collateral. That's the point. If there's no collateral, there's no Kenyan. You don't need to worry about. You don't need to worry
But
about
but
that.
again, the rabbis are going back to a Kenyan. He's acquiring the property during the term.
Right.
So it's saying, which is not a loan. It is, you're using something, you're getting a return on lending, using the property as consideration. And I still don't understand how that's not ribis. And as you said, in prior weeks, they want commerce to happen. They don't want there to be, an obstruction. But again, I mean, so you're using it. So he says to you, prepay me if you want. He's not saying prepay me because you have to, because the original deal was pay me at a certain time. But now I'm going to invoke a prepayment option for you, which means you get out of the property because I have, or I have to get out of the property because I have the right to use it. And then I'm pulling, if you pay early, then I got to get out. So it just means you're getting your money back early. He doesn't have to prepay. You're not saying you must prepay this loan. So I'm getting absolute consideration.
Right.
I might be, but I don't have to. And in this loan that you're describing, that he gets to live there. So, to say that he's not getting anything in return, if you get the use of a property because you're forcing, in essence, you're getting use of the property during that time. So you are getting consideration, and you're getting more than just lending something for nothing.
Right. I acknowledge that, except that the halacha, just regularly, the halacha is consideration has to be made at the time of the onset of the deal. That's the halacha. That when we make a deal in real time, there has to be consideration. That's the halacha. The question becomes, the deal's been struck, no problem. In the middle of the deal, one of the parties wants to change the terms of the deal. So the Gemara asks, is that okay? Can he do that? Or he's already made a deal. In order to change the terms of the deal, there has to be some consideration, even though he's not asking for consideration. He wants to change the terms of the deal. But the halacha would require him to get consideration because consideration is a component of the deal. And the Gemara is saying, and I understand your question here, but the Gemara is saying that without consideration, you can't change the term of the deal.
But Rabbi, if there was no property involved as a security interest,
correct,
and it was a straight loan with no security interest, and he unilaterally, the lender said, you can pay me early, there would be no consideration, correct?
Correct.
Which is evidentiary that the fact that you're securing a property because I'm demanding a security interest, and because the rabbis believe that security interest you can use during that time period, that turns it into consideration. If he was not allowed to use the property, but it was a security interest, and he said you can prepay me early, it wouldn't matter, would it?
Once
Michael, you're really asking, why can't the conversation be strong enough to change the terms without the need for consideration?
Right.
Don't the Rabbanim allow the basic conversation to be powerful enough to just move it to the next phase? You can prepay if you want to.
But why does it have to be? So, Michael, to your point, when there's no property involved, the whole question of consideration doesn't come into play.
Yes, but consideration implies you're getting something for the loan. If there's consideration for the loan, then you're getting a benefit and you're getting ribis on the loan. Very simply, and I understand. So you've introduced, because you're saying, well, they're not going to lend unless they get something for it. It really, in essence, is ribis. I'm lending you money, but I'm getting something on behalf of it. That's what you're talking about, consideration. I'm getting something in return for me lending you. So if I demand that you put up a property, as consideration or as a security interest, then, and you said this before, the deal imputes automatically that you get use of the property. So now you've got a different deal. I'm lending you money in return for using your property during that time period. That's not a straight loan. That's not out of the goodness of my heart. I'm getting something in return for that, whether it's the payros or the use or getting to live there or reside there or whatever. So then I understand that it's that you're changing the terms of the loan afterward. But if you just introduce and say you can pay me earlier, I don't understand why that it means that I'm going to leave your property under those circumstances. But all it's saying is you can pay me early. You don't have to pay me early, but you can. So why is that a term change?
Because he's giving him something that he didn't have at the outset of the deal. He's giving him a condition that the borrower did not have. Now, when you say use of the property, I can take collateral and have no interest in the property and just leave it there because now I know if you default on the loan, I have a piece of property.
And that's exactly what it should be under those circumstances. And then there's no benefit. And you say you pay me early. What's the difference? The land is only up there for security. The deal, I mean, the way a loan is, if we're calling it a loan, and I know the rabbis have turned loan into sales and so on and so forth, but if it's a loan, straight out, pay me by certain date, this amount of money, I'm lending you this money. If the lender says, you want to pay me early, that's great. I'll get, and he introduces that later, but he's not saying you must pay me early. Why is that changing anything?
Okay, so in terms of understanding, you're right. I mean, there's no question that what you're stating is makes sense, except that, and this is what you have to accept. You have to accept that there's a condition that has to be included in this deal, which you're arguing, why bother? And everything else is going along smoothly. Why does there have to be a kinyan after the fact? That's what you're asking.
But what's the kinyan? If I say to you, you want to pay me early, great. Here's the date of the loan, but I'll accept an earlier payment.
No, all he has to do, Michael, is he has to take a handkerchief, make a kinyan sudar. Remember, this is a symbolic thing. So he makes a kinyan sudar and says, now that you've changed the terms of the loan, consideration is this kinyan.
But Rabbi, there's no reason for the kinyan. You haven't acquired anything.
You've acquired the right to use the property. You may not.
Well, see,
right.
We just talked about a situation where he's not using the property. It's merely a security interest.
But right, but since he has the right to use the property, he now has rights which he's giving up. The Gemara makes the point that to give up rights, even though we don't know if he wants to use the property, but since he can use the property, giving up that right has to be in exchange for something, says the Gemara. You have to give me something.
So just as you just said, let's say he's not using the property and he hasn't paid early. What's he giving up? I mean, that's
no. You're right. In that case,
the premise is that I'm getting something for the loan. That, I can't win this, but innately you're getting something for the loan. You're getting a return for the loan. It doesn't have to be in money interest. I'm getting to use a property that's not mine in return for the loan. So I'm getting a return. But if he introduces saying, you can pay me early, he gets his cash back earlier. Maybe he needs the cash. Maybe that's why he's introducing it. Right. So he doesn't use the land, but he gets the cash back earlier. So why can't he unilaterally do that? Why does there have to be, as Jay said, why does there have to be all this Gatsa Gedilla on having this happen?
Okay, so you're right. And the answer is, absent the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, what you're saying makes 100% sense. But the Torah says in order for people not to just, swing each way. Yes, you can. No, you can't. But there has to be something concrete that certifies a deal. Again, not arguing your facts. Your facts make sense, except that the rabbis make the halacha and say that the halacha is that You can't just do that verbally. Here, you have it back. It's a benefit to you. That's all fine and good, except that the halacha imposes that something has to happen, something concrete has to happen to change those terms. From your standpoint, no big deal. I'll change my terms. I need the money. I'll get a benefit.
Well, it's a unilateral change. I do get something for it. I get if he decides to pay me early, I get my cash back. That means something.
No, and you're right with that. But the Rabbanim come and tell us that in order to do something like that, which again is very straightforward, there has to be something concrete that shows consideration. And again, this is a point. Yeah, so this is a point that the halacha wants to tell us, that a consideration is an integral part of a deal. Even though you're right that he is getting a benefit, he's getting the cash back. And if he offered it, he probably has the benefit of the cash. That's 100% correct. But in order to fulfill that, something has to happen. So Rav Papa, let me just say, so Rav Papa says, you know why you can do that without a kinyan? Because of the principle of mechila. I can change my mind. I can be mochel, and I can say, I'm giving up the right to prepayment, to non-prepayment, and I'm not getting anything back for it. And that's okay, according to Rav Papa. It's the other man, the Omar, who says, not so fast. Mechila in this case won't help, because you can't have mechila on your own property. I can be mochel you for something that you and I engage in, but if I have the property, or in this case, the rights to the non-prepayment, that I can't be mochel. And because I can't be mochel it, something else has to show for it to say this is valid.
You know how illogical this sounds to me, Rabbi? It's the basic premise is, well, you should loan your fellow Jew money. We should help them in need. And then we're saying, well, if the guy says, well, I got to get something for it, so put up your land as collateral and let me use the land. So now I'm getting something for it. So if I'm imposing a condition, he's not imposing the condition. If he was imposing the condition that you have to pay early, I understand what you're saying. But he's saying to him, you have the option to pay early. And you don't have to do it, but if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. So how can that be that you have to give consideration for that? Because he may want his cash faster, and under the rabbi's definition that he can use the land, which is something that he's getting a benefit of, it's his own decision. So he's got to get out of the land early in exchange for cash. It doesn't affect the borrower in any way, shape, or form. The borrower can pay early, he can pay later. So it's not a condition that requires, it's something that benefits the lender only. It doesn't hurt the borrower. So why does there have to be consideration for it?
Again, so my point is, in principle, you're 100% correct, which makes a whole lot of sense, except for the fact that you can argue that it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but it doesn't make sense, but it's a halacha. It's a halacha that there has to be, in a changed circumstance. You're going to say that consideration is already given by the fact that he needs to give up. And that's fine and good. I am not arguing that. But we're saying that the Chachamim have imposed a condition on top of what you're saying.
But that's only according to one man damar.
One man damar.
But exactly. The other man damar, Rav Papa says
you don't have to.
You don't have to, because he sees that. So I don't know what the halacha is, but
yeah. So let's just finish the next line. Vehilchasa tzarach lemikne minei, and the halacha is that the borrower does have to make a kinyan. So the halacha is not like Rav Papa. The halacha is that if you want to change the terms of the deal, then let's say it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai that you have to do something other than saying, "Oh, you're getting the benefit of it. Of course, we're going to allow you to do it. You want the cash. I'm not going to stop the way you're getting the cash if you want to give it up, but." In order to have a certain seder, a certain order in the halacha, we're saying that that agreement in real time cannot be changed later unless something else is done to validate the change. And that means the consideration. So you're right, it's a machlokes. Rav Papa says no, and Rav Sheshes says yes, and the halacha is like Rav Sheshes, that you do need to have some kind of a kinyan. It's as simple as sudar. Just
it's form over substance because the halacha is that way, but it doesn't make any logical sense.
And I'm not disagreeing with you, Michael. So sometimes halacha Moshe Sinai means it doesn't make sense, but that's the halacha.
But do we have something missing here? Is it possible that the Rabbanan were concerned with Maris Ayin, what this whole scene looks like to the outsiders? In other words, are people expecting if conditions change, there'd be some sort of kinyan, some sort of ceremony or whatever to change the rules? Because from the outside viewer, they don't really understand what's going on here in terms of A and B have a loan. And
Right. So
we're missing something about the broader view
right.
of how the community looks at this.
So that's a very good question because Maris Ayin does come into the picture to some degree, not necessarily here, but the principle of Maris Ayin is absolutely something we're concerned with in Ribbis, because if someone doesn't understand what's going on, he's going to say it's Ribbis when it's not Ribbis. In this particular case, it isn't so much a Ribbis issue. It's a question of halacha. Can you change the terms of the deal in the middle of the deal without there being some kind of quid pro quo? That's the question. And according to Rav Papa, you do not need quid pro quo. Why? Because you're allowed to, the fallback is you can do mechila. If you can do mechila, then what do you need a quid pro quo for? But according to Rav Sheshes, you can't do mechila in this particular case. You can't just on a whim say, "I'll meichel you, go ahead and pay me back." So if mechila doesn't help, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, there has to be some kind of recognizable dealing between the lender and the borrower that allows him to change his mind. Michael's point is, if he changes his mind, he changes his mind. Why are we making such a big fuss? He's changing his mind. He now wants to be prepaid. He may have a motive. He needs the cash, whatever it is. Who's going to be why should anybody stand in the way? So Rav Papa agrees with you. No one should stand in the way. But Rav Sheshes says, no. Halacha is halacha. The Torah says, or the rabbis interpret the Torah to say that when two people engage in a deal, there has to be consideration. Fine. The giving of the money is consideration. Now, in the middle of the deal, there's changed terms. Says Rav Sheshes, those changed terms, you can't just willy-nilly say, I'm changing the deal, here it is. Rav Papa says you can, but Rav Sheshes says you can't change, except if I do something in consideration, then everybody will see, Jay, everybody looking will see, oh, wait a minute, this wasn't just a happenstance deal. They made an arrangement. The arrangement was that he let him off the hook and he was allowing him to take a prepayment, and the customer was not. But in return, he's getting a kinyan. Now, the kinyan suitor isn't really money because he's not getting a monetary benefit. but he's getting a symbolic benefit, which according to Reb Sheshes is necessary. So, Michael, to your point, everything you say is correct, according to Rav Papa. But according to Rav Sheshes, there has to be a symbolism. There has to be something that shows that a change of terms is okay, that you just don't willy-nilly change for the sake of change or for some other benefit.
If there was an adverse impact on the borrower because of that change, I would agree.
I
But the
understand.
fact is, there is no adverse change.
There's
It
no
can
adverse
keep it
impact.
exactly the way it is, and it's an imposition of something that does not require a tit for tat. I mean, it just doesn't. So, just to say, well, because Halacha Sinai says that, then we have to show something just for show, not because of anything else,
Right.
is just hard to swallow.
It's hard to swallow, but that's why we say Halacha Moshe Sinai. In other words, it's not something that you can say concretely, I understand about this, because you're right. Why should there have to be something? The reason why there is because the halacha tells us that in any transaction there has to be a kinyan. So if you're changing a transaction midstream, there has to be something given quid pro quo according to Rav Sheshes, and you have to make the kinyan. Absent the kinyan, you cannot make the kinyan.
Well, there is something quid pro quo inherent. There's something quid pro quo inherent in this under the terms, which is I get out, you pay me early, I get out. So I don't have to, but you pay me early, I get out. So it's quid pro quo. I get the cash early, I get out, you have your property back free and clear. So, and you can do that. You don't have to.
So it's an interesting point, but obviously according to Rav Sheshes, in the middle of the deal, the payment, the cash, which would otherwise be consideration, I agree. In the middle of a deal, that cash can now not be consideration unless there is some recognizable kinyan. The kinyan in the beginning of the deal, in other words, the principle here is, when is the kinyan being made? Is it being made before the transaction or after the transaction? So the halacha says, if the kinyan is being made in real time, as the transaction is going down, that money is consideration. But once the deal has been struck, then money just exchanging, according to Rav Sheshes, is no longer consideration without a recognizable kinyan. That's Rav Sheshes' point. And obviously,
we're losing the essence of a transaction. This is a loan, and paying it back early, if it's supposed to be in the spirit of the loan, is helping someone out, and if you pay it back early, you're paying back it early because of all the wrinkles that the rabbis are allowing, which is you can, if you put up a property of security interest, you could use the property during that time period. Then you're still saying, if you don't want to do it, I'll stay in the property the whole time. You're not changing the essence of the deal. This is all, if you do this, so you got to get something for it. You got something for it. You get my it's inherent in the deal. I get my cash back early and I get out of your place. It's right. So it's there. It's in there. So this does not have any adverse impact on the borrower. That's why I don't see why it comes under that rubric.
And Rav Papa agrees with you. Rav Papa agrees with you that there is nothing that should stand in the way of the parties being allowed to do it. But his reasoning is not just because it makes sense, because I could do it another way. I could just be mochel and do it another way. And therefore, if I'm doing it this way, you have to honor me because I could have done it another way. It's like a migui, if you will. But Rav Sheshes, and again, your point is well taken, but Rav Sheshes says that there is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, notwithstanding what you're saying, which makes 100% sense, but there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that on top of what you're saying that makes sense, there has to be something, a metzia, something that recognizes that this transaction is okay. And we call that a kinyan. Now, you're going to say, why bother with the kinyan? And again, it is one of those areas where you can say, yeah, why bother with the Kenyan? Let them just prepay it, and it's all done.
But Rabbi, more importantly, this is really, it could be all obviated in today's parlance by a sale and buyback. You sell the property for consideration. You agree to buy it by a certain time before, for that amount beforehand. And then it's not a loan because you got use of the property during that. I would argue that you should force it to be a sale because it's not a loan, because you're getting something for the loan. So you force a sale with a right to buy back as of a certain time. Whenever I pay it back, the loan back, I have the right to purchase my property back at this price. And then it is a sale and repurchase at that time, and then it avoids any inkling of
and that's exactly what we have said. The Gemara in previous weeks said that under certain circumstances that loan becomes a sale, and therefore there's no ribbis issue anymore because it's a sale with a buyback. That's exactly what the Gemara is.
And that would obviate all this stuff.
That's correct. That's correct.
So why doesn't the Gemara force that to be the interpretation?
They don't force it. In other words, where it happens, you're 100% correct. But then they don't force it to make it happen. Again, it's kind of like, it's not one size fits all. We can agree that there are some circumstances where a loan looks like a sale, and therefore there's no ribbis. And at some point, he buys it back. But it is a loan, except that we're not.
It's not a loan if you got use of the property. It's not a loan. I'm paying for the right to use your property.
And the Gemara says, yeah. So the Gemara says that's okay that you can.
I know, but it's not really a loan. Technically, and to Jay's earlier point, and I don't want to impose all my theories on Jay, but to his earlier point, why do you have to make it so convoluted when it can be direct and simpler if you do it that way, and then you don't have to worry about any of this?
Michael, because the Gemara doesn't want to make it simple. we don't want to make it simple. We want to look at all the nuances. And again, this Halacha L'Moshe Sinai is on top of what you're saying correctly, is a deal that the parties can transact and there's a benefit. But the Gemara is telling us, notwithstanding the benefit, that he's getting the money back and he can use it now, that's a big plus. There has to be something palpable. There has to be some kind of a siman, some kind of a sort of not just a statement, but an action. There has to be an action that allows that statement to come to fruition. That's what the Gemara is really trying to tell us.
But the essence of my point is it defeats what the Torah is trying to infuse to people to lend money. If I'm getting something in return, and I know the Torah allows that because of the interpretations that you can use the property, it's not really just a loan. So it's a variation of a theme, but it means that people are going to find ways to lend money that are in their best interest, and it's not truly a loan to help just to help your fellow. It's a way to devise benefit that I can get if I'm going to lend the money, and that is the essence of ribbis. I mean, that's what it's supposed to defeat, and yet to me, it smacks all of ribbis.
Yeah. Well, we go round and around, and again, your theory is certainly supported by Rav Papa, so I think you're on firm footing. You just disagree with Rav Sheshes and the halacha that why do we need it? But remember, this does not thwart or in any way chill the principle that people should lend money to somebody else. It doesn't change it at all, because all we're not asking you for monetary consideration. We just say, make a Kinyan Sudar. So the question is, Michael, why are you so adamant against a Kinyan Sudar that will sort of tie up the loose ends, literally, not just figuratively. It'll
because
tie up the loose ends and allow the deal to happen after it's already been promulgated, and it doesn't change the principle that people should continue to loan because
but it's still a one-sided deal, Rabbi. The borrower isn't getting anything on this except he gets to use his land back earlier if he wants to do that. So, he doesn't have to.
And all the Torah is telling us, according to the rabbis, that in order to do that midstream in a deal, you have to have a kinyan. That's all we're saying, is that if you do it at the outset, you don't need a kinyan suitor. But if you do it when the deal's already done, then let's just say for aesthetic purposes or for purposes of people seeing that you can't just wheel and deal and say, oh, yes, I lent it, but now I'm going to get it back. We've got to do something that puts an imprint on this deal. And then people will say, oh, okay. So there was some kind of consideration. Now, in a different circumstance, consideration could be something more substantial than just a suitor, But here, it's just a suitor. Just a kinyan suitor. It solidifies the change terms of the deal. And everybody goes home happy and nothing changes. Lenders still should lend, borrowers should borrow, prepay, not prepay. Everything is as it was, but the Torah is telling us a halacha that there's a difference between making an agreement in real time or making an agreement after the deal's been struck and you want to change the terms of the deal, says the Gemara, in order to change the terms of the deal, according to Rav Sheshes, you need some kind of a kinyan. Rav Papa says you don't need a kinyan.
So, Rabbi, could it be that in those days they publicized all the loans that were active such that people would know that somebody doesn't own something?
Okay.
Somebody wants to falsely sell something.
Use it as collateral for something else, right?
So maybe they did publish a lot of these situations. And therefore, when anybody's contract that was published was changed, they had something that people would see that it was changed.
No, I doubt it. I mean, I think that we have things like that today where you go to sell your house, the liens, if there were liens on the house, they're recorded and then it comes out because they check that. But back in those days, remember, most of these contracts, even for all kinds of things, didn't even have a little scrap of paper, let alone a full-blown contract. And so how would you have a central list of here's all the things?
I don't think there was a central list. No, there wasn't a central list. It was probably more word of mouth.
Right. There might have been word of mouth when the sale was done. That's the whole idea. We had this on the Shabbos morning recently about the whole issue of having witnesses to a deal so that then if it came back later that somebody said they didn't know, there would be witnesses who would say, no, this deal has happened.
Right. So it's according to Rav Sheshes, let's call it's a pro forma thing that a person shouldn't just feel that he can make any change he wants at any point in time, and it's kind of like Hefker. So according to him, there has to be a seder, and the halach l'Moshe Sinai was that there has to be some recognizable form of consideration. Notwithstanding what Michael said, well, the consideration is now he gets the property. I mean, gets his money, his property back, and of course that's a good thing. But that's not consideration. So according to Papa, it's fine. But according to Rav Sheshes, so we do see, Michael, that your point is well taken, because Rav Papa is actually saying that. It's just that in the eyes of Rav Sheshes, we need something a little bit more. We need something that the Halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells us is allowable, and therefore you have to make some kind of objective kinyan suitor. No money changes hands. There's no obligation on anybody except. Now, let me ask you a question. When you sell chametz on Pesach, okay, you've sold the chametz. What is that kinyan suitor? What is it all about? I mean, is that sort of a fiction? It's a symbolic act that we've made a deal. Does it change the terms of the deal? No. Are the terms of the deal set because you spoke to the goy and you said, this is how it's going to go down, and you can do this and you can do that? That's the way the deal is made. accept that in real time, what we do. Now, mind you, when the rabbi made the deal with the non-Jew, he didn't make a kinyan. There's no kinyan. He said, here, let's just have an agreement. And the agreement could be on paper and say, you have rights to all of this chametz, and it's yours. Hefker. Okay, there'll be a nominal exchange of money for his trouble, for whatever.
But he doesn't have the right to use it during Pesach, only if it's not returned, if he doesn't get his money back at the end. Then he has the right to go through. But it's
no. But technically, during Pesach, he's owner of the property. That if he wanted to go to your refrigerator in the middle of Pesach, or your whatever, wherever you squirreled away some hummus, he has the right to do that. The kinyan sudar is after the fact, after the deal's been struck. The rabbi comes to you and says, "Do you want to sell your chametz? I've already sold chametz. I've already have a deal with the non-Jew. Do you want to sell yours? If you do, come and join." How do you join? With a kinyan sudar. Just lift the kinyan, the sudar, and you'll be part of the deal. That's kind of what Rav Sheshes is saying here. It's no skin off your nose to say you want to change the deal and just make a kinyan sudar. How have you lost? You haven't lost anything. Right? So therefore, the halacha is like Rav Sheshes, because we're showing symbolically, not in reality, but symbolically, that there's a new deal. And according to Rav Sheshes, that's necessary. It's necessary to have a symbolic event to change the terms of the deal. Rav Papa says no symbolism is required because he could have done it without anything. Mechila. But according to Rav Sheshes, Mechila doesn't help. Therefore, you have to have some kind of a symbolism, and that kinyan sudar, as in the case of Mechiras Chometz. Otherwise, why bother with the kinyan sudar? Come and join, put your name on the paper, and you'll join the deal. Why do we require the kinyan sudar for him in Pesach?
But that's a very different deal than this, because you're adding consideration. You're saying, I am obligated to sell this, so it's out of my possession. I'm for a fee. You're going to hold this goy, and you're going to hold this until after this certain time, and we're purchasing back. So you're taking ownership of it. In the other deal, nothing's changed. In the prepayment changes absolutely nothing, except for the fact that he gets his money, the lender gets his money back earlier, which means he has to vacate the premises earlier. Nothing else changes, which was the inherent part of the deal. Whenever he paid the loan back, he had to get out of the property. So he's paying it early. Mm-hmm. And so there is nothing different about that. Whereas in the case of selling chametz, you are gaining something from that.
Well, but you're also gaining in the case of the loan, because you're getting your property back. The lender is getting his cash back, and you said before that may be a good thing for him because he needs the cash now, so he's willing to accept it early. That's kind of like the Pesach situation, because there is some kind of benefit. There is some kind of a benefit. Remember, when you sell your chametz to the goy, you're getting a benefit, because the Torah says val yimotzei. So right. You would otherwise have to throw it all away. By selling it to the goy,
that is why I'm arguing that is a benefit, whereas in the other case, it's not a benefit.
But you yourself said before that if the lender says I will now accept a prepay, it's because he finds it beneficial to get his money back early, because
Let me ask a question: if there was no such agreement and the borrower came back early and paid off the loan, wouldn't that automatically trigger it regardless?
But this is a situation where no prepayment is allowed. So in a case where no prepayment is allowed, you can't just come back.
Well, it doesn't specifically say no prepayment is allowed. It says that for the duration of the loan, the loan is to be paid by this date. In the interim, I can use your property.
That's right. But that means
it doesn't say you can't prepay.
No. That's what it means. It means in a community where prepayments are not allowed, it means you can't prepay. That's the Gemara's chilek between a community where you're allowed to prepay and a community where you're not allowed to prepay. So if you have a 5-year loan and you're not allowed to prepay, I have that property for 5 years, and that's to my advantage because now I can use that
Okay.
property collateral for
And
another
again,
loan.
that is not a loan without consideration, without getting something out of it. So I hear you, but I
Yeah.
don't
I think
agree.
we can go around and around,
Yeah,
but
I
I think
know,
at the
I
end of the
know.
day,
I'll shut up on it now.
yeah, at the end of the day, Rav Sheshes is saying it's halacha l'Moshe Messina that you need to have some kind of consideration other than in the deal, meaning the money coming back and the property coming back. There has to be some outside of that kinyan, and therefore it doesn't change monetarily at all because the kinyan suitor doesn't change anything monetarily, but it shows kinyan suitor shows that the parties are making a change to the original deal, and therefore the world should know that the money is going back and the property is going back, and that Kenyan Suitor sort of cements the deal. Again, I can't argue with you because there is a valid position. The Papa says that. It's just that you want to argue that Rav Sheshes shouldn't say his position because Rav Papa makes more sense. Okay, Rav Papa's position maybe make more sense, but you see that the halacha is like Rav Sheshes. The halacha is like Rav Sheshes. All right, we have a few more minutes. Let's just and again, these are terrific questions, and a lot of the things we're talking about today are going to appear in the Gemara in a short period of time. So, Jay, to your point as well, we're going to see some questions come up here very shortly. So, this one more situation. All right. So we're in a position, in a case, in a place where, let's say, prepayment is allowed. Okay. What does that mean? It's allowed. What should happen? So the Gemara says, if the borrower comes and says, I'm bringing you the money now, and I'm going to pay it, that's an indication that he's ready to make the payment. And therefore, like we said before, the lender can no longer take any of the fruit or the food, the produce of the field, because it immediately stops when he prepays, right? So therefore, it's pretty straightforward. What happens if the borrower says, Azel, the Azel, the Etrach, the Isazuzi, I will go out and try to find the money to pay you. Not that I have the money to pay you. When I have the money to pay you, the deal is over. Prepayment is allowed. He's giving you the money. Everything's frozen in time. Well, what happens if he doesn't say, I have the money? If he says, he calls him up and he says, Reuven, I'm going out to get the money now. I'm giving you a heads up that I'm going to get the money and prepay. So the Gemara is asking a question, is that sufficient that he's just giving him notice? It's an interesting question because
why would we have a question on that?
Because he's not actually prepaying.
But he's
prepayment means
it's loose talk. I mean, he says, I'm giving you a heads up.
So you're saying it's loose talk. It doesn't mean anything, right?
No, it means what it says, but it's not something legal that should change anything. The fact that he's going out, he may go out all over town and not get the money. It's just a statement. I'm going out looking for a car.
Right.
It's just regular conversation. It shouldn't have any bearing on what the loan and the situation is until he actually has the money in hand.
Right. So it should be that straightforward. So says the Gemara.
I said, I know this guy, a friend of mine, keeps asking the question, why are we complicating things?
Right. Because nothing in life is simple, especially not within the Gemara. if it was simple, we wouldn't have the Shakla and the Gemara. We wouldn't have this discussion. But here, so we'll just conclude and say, Ravina Omar Ochel. Ravina says that, to your point, Jay, you can continue to eat the produce because he doesn't pay him. All he does is idle talk. It's just talk. I'll go and get the money. Doesn't mean anything. Mar Zutra, Bered Rav Mori Omar Lo Ochel. Mar Zutra, in the name of, says that he should not eat at the time. Why? Because according to him, the notice is sufficient to stop temporarily to stop everything in its track. So we're going to give him some time now to fulfill the words that he says. Again, Mazutra is taking a more stringent approach. And he's saying, if the guy's already coming back and saying, I'm going to pay you, then Mistama, he's already on the verge of getting the money. Now, he doesn't have the money, but Mazutra says, we're going to consider it as if he will have it imminently. Therefore, everything should stop in its tracks.
So because
he made
that statement, so that statement is implying that the money's on the way.
Say it again.
So when he makes a statement to the lender that I'm going out to get the money,
right?
That already would psychologically change the situation.
Correct.
Because the lender has expectations that in the next 48 hours or whatever he's saying, he's coming in with the money.
Right. So according to Mazutra, what's the ramification? The ramification is, can the lender continue to eat the produce of the field when that is said? Clearly, when he pays him the money, you have to stop immediately. But you have to stop immediately when he says, I'm about to pay you, meaning I don't have the money, but I'm about to pay you. I have to collect it.
Why does he open his mouth and talk? I mean, what's the point? What's the borrower getting any benefit by?
He is getting a benefit. No, he's getting a benefit. He's preventing the lender from eating produce on the field. The minute he comes to him and says, I'm going to get ready to pay you, the lender can no longer take the fruit of the field, according to Mazutra. According to Ravina, you can continue to eat until you actually get the money. According to Mazutra, notice is enough to stop eating. But the question is, how long does he have to wait? Yeah. A day, a week, a month? How much time does he have to give the borrower to make the money? So the pshat is that he has to give him a sufficient amount of time. And since in the harvest season, the produce is fresh, so when it comes to a point where that produce is gonna start spoiling, and he hasn't been paid, then the lender is allowed to take the produce and eat it or sell it or whatever. So it isn't just a random statement that lasts forever. The pshat is that if he's already coming back and saying, I really want to redeem this deal and I'm going to go put my money together, that's already notice to the lender that he should, okay, I'll back off. And the teretz is, and that's the halacha, by the way, the halacha is, according to Mazutra, that he should no longer eat from the field, except the caveat is that he only has to wait to the point where the fruit or the food, the produce, whatever it is still saleable or edible. Once it starts getting into the point where, I don't know if that's 30 days or less or more, then he's allowed to take it, because then the borrower hasn't come through with his statement that I'm going to buy. So again, we see, that again, it's nuanced. It's pretty simple when he gives him the money. But when he doesn't give the money and just gives him notice, what does notice mean?
Yeah.
What does notice mean?
But everybody, it's an assumption that everybody knows when the spoiling would happen.
Right. That's right. We know that it's X number of days or weeks, whatever it happens to be.
Everybody knows that.
Now, it's very interesting just to conclude, Ravina says you can eat. Who is Ravina? Last week we talked about Ravina being a big Talmud Chacham and a tzaddik, but he kept it all hidden. Why? Because he didn't want to be considered Tzurva D'Rabbanan. In other words, all these halacha apply to you and to me and to everybody else. But Tzurva D'Rabbanan, the Talmidei Chachamim have to take an extra step away, not to show that there's even, not that there's ribbis, but they got to take a step away. They shouldn't even be tainted by the question of, is it ribbis? It's not, but they should never be in the conversation. Ravina was the exception. Ravina kept it all hidden. So this Ravina who did that is the one who says, sure, you can eat. There's no problem with eating. Why? Because the deal hasn't been done yet. And he takes a much more open view that in order for the deal to be done, you got to pay him. If you don't pay him, the deal isn't done. And that's consistent with Ravina's whole position of who he was and what he allowed, because he allowed things that the Tzurva D'Rabbanan, which he was the Tzurva D'Rabbanan, but he kept it hidden, wouldn't allow. But here we're allowing it because pretty straightforward. Didn't pay him. But according to Mazutra, we make that condition. And again, we complicated Michael unnecessarily only because we're showing differences of opinion on what seems to be. Now, you can always say, all right, it's pretty straightforward. This is the way it should be. But again, these are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There are halachas that require, even maybe it doesn't make as much sense as you'd like it to, right? Because al pi seichel,
it doesn't happen.
Things should be more straightforward, but the Torah doesn't work that way. The Torah doesn't say, oh, knee jerk, you know, you're going to pay, it's good enough. No. So we have to have, again, we take all these with a grain of salt, all these cases with a grain of salt, that what is meant here is kind of to restrain a little bit so that people should not just say, oh, it's hefker, here today, gone tomorrow, I'm making a deal, I'm not making a deal. There has to be some seder. So we're trying to make some seder of it according to these Mandra Amrim, and that's the halacha, that we have to make some kind of a seder, some kind of an order, so that the Hamonam who are looking at this will say, oh, okay, I get it. There was something going on here. It wasn't just he retracted from the deal without anything. There was a Kenyan Sudder. Okay, I get a Kenyan Sudder. So it's not materially changing the deal. Michael, you don't even want to have the Sudder, but it's not changing the deal by saying, do something symbolic to show that there is a changed circumstance. So that's really what this is about. It's not so much about imposing something that is onerous on one side or another. It's just saying that symbolism matters. Symbolism matters. And to your point, Jay, something that appears to be ribbis, there's a chashash ribbis, but if it's not ribbis, then somehow we have to clarify that it's not ribbis, because to the bystander, it's going to look like ribbis, right? He's taking a portion of the field, and then he's going to get his money back. Why is that not ribbis? So I think the consistency here, and we see that the halacha is consistent. The halacha consistently takes the more stringent approach, not the easy approach like Rav Papa or Ravina, but take the more stringent approach of Sheshes or Mazutra, that you need some kind of a symbolism or some kind of an event that will establish the bona fides, if you will, of what's going on.
They're very process oriented.
What's that?
They're very process oriented, so that it can be universally applied to populations.
Yeah,
you need process, otherwise it does revert to hefker.
That's right. I think that's a point well taken. All right, so we'll stop here and have a great conversation. And to you, Michael, just rest assured that you have Rapapa on your side, so that everything you've been arguing is not just idle; it's real. except that on the other side, there's a Manda Amar who doesn't quite agree, and the halacha seems to be like that Manda Amar. You may not like that, but at the end of the day, we can live with it.
It seems to me that Michael is a descendant. Michael might be a descendant of Rav Papa, and he doesn't know it.
Michael, check your yichus. Maybe you are.
He may
All
not
right.
know it. All right,
Everybody,
yes, go on.
wonderful shiur. Thank you. Have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
very much.